As I was preparing dinner at home, my husband Matt came back earlier than usual. I didn't bother to greet him, but I noticed two sets of footsteps coming down the hallway. I paused in my cooking. That's unusual. Did he bring someone home? Matt stomped down the hall and threw open the door with force, suddenly glaring at me.
From today, we're living together. If you don't like it, get out.
Shocked by his sudden outburst, I glanced next to him and saw someone I hadn't expected at all. It was Kenny. Kenny is a boy I often meet while walking the dog in the park. Our eyes met, and both of us held our breath. Even then, Matt, without explaining anything, kept insisting that we were going to live together. He repeated the same thing over and over, not giving me a chance to speak. I couldn't believe he had brought Kenny home. After waiting for Matt to finish talking, I finally replied, "All right." He probably thought that I was intimidated by his demeanor and had agreed to the arrangement. Matt wore a proud expression, as if to say, "Naturally." But that expression quickly changed when Kenny spoke up.
Finally.
Kenny smiled brightly at me, and I smiled back. Matt, however, looked confused, as if wondering what was going on. Really, it's amazing. What we talked about has finally come true. It was unbelievable. Who could have imagined that our wish would come true in such a way? Ever since that moment when I discovered a certain truth, I had been hoping for this outcome. The alarm clock rang, and another day began. I am Helen, soon to turn 50. I live with my husband, Matt, though by the time I wake up, he's usually already left for work. He'll probably be home late tonight, as well. When we first got married, I used to see Matt off with a smile when he left the house, and I'd be there to greet him at the door when he came back. But that habit has long since faded. Now, Matt rushes out the door without a word to me. When did things start to go wrong? Our marriage isn't going well. Lack of communication, differences in values, and issues with in-laws, all these things can cause tension in a marriage. In our case, it all started with my infertility. From the beginning, both of us wanted children, and I went through treatments at the OB/GYN. Infertility can be caused by a number of factors, like ovulation disorders or immune problems, but for me, the cause was unclear. Despite continuing treatment, I wasn't able to conceive, and before I knew it, I had reached this age. In the beginning, I believe Matt was quite supportive. He often accompanied me to the clinic and took the time to research infertility, sharing what he learned with me. I remember how he would find exercises and supplements that were supposed to increase the chances of pregnancy and encourage me to try them. Each time our treatment escalated and it became clear that I still couldn't conceive, the shock I felt was indescribable, but Matt would cry and grieve alongside me. However, over time, his patience wore thin, and he began to lash out with hurtful words more frequently.
It's your fault we can't have kids. What are you going to do about it?
Please don't say that. The cruel words from the person I wanted to understand me the most wore me down day by day. Now, When we do see each other, we either have heated arguments or avoid speaking altogether. Our marriage has grown cold. In the past few years, Matt has been coming home late from work, and we hardly spend any time together. Despite the gloom that fills my days at home, there is still something I look forward to. All right, Rolly, let's head out. Rolly is my beloved dog, whom I started raising about 5 years ago. I take care of everything related to him, feeding, walks, and shopping for his supplies. I had asked Matt if we could get a dog to fill the void in our unhappy marriage. His response was, "Do whatever you want." So I went to the pet shop alone and brought Rolly home. The breed of Rolly is a Shih Tzu. With a friendly personality and soft, fluffy fur that's absolutely adorable. His rounded silhouette after a haircut is what inspired his name. The moment I saw him looking up at me from inside his crate, I was completely smitten. Back then, Rolly was a tiny puppy, but now he's grown up considerably. I read that a dog's 5 years is equivalent to about 36 human years. It's strange to think that this adorable creature is actually a grown adult. Taking Rolly out for walks along our usual route has become a routine, both morning and evening. Being outside and moving around helps to ease the gloomy feelings caused by the tension at home. Rolly, who doesn't know the meaning of shyness, approaches everyone he meets with enthusiasm. Thanks to him, I've become familiar with many of the people who greet us or walk their dogs in the neighborhood. I find that talking to others through my dog makes it easier to connect with them than if I were talking one-on-one. Engaging in conversations with people I meet during our walks has become one of my small joys.
Good morning, Helen and Rolly.
Good morning, Kenny. Kenny is a 6-year-old boy who lives nearby. He's full of smiles and always so charming. He greets us every time we cross paths during our walks, and as a result, Rolly has grown very fond of him. What have you been up to today? I always ask Kenny this question whenever we meet. When I asked the question, Kenny's face fell slightly, showing a hint of sadness. As I got to know Kenny better, I began to notice a few things. Kenny often wandered outside alone, not just in the morning but also during evening walks. His parents seemed indifferent to him. I also noticed that his clothes were often not the right size and a bit dirty, which concerned me. Could he be a victim of neglect? From what I could tell, there didn't seem to be any direct violence involved. However, since Kenny never shared any joyful stories about his parents, it was clear that he wasn't being cherished and was likely experiencing some level of neglect. I considered reporting this to Child Protective Services, but I hesitated, knowing that, in some cases, children could be separated from their parents. The thought of my decision potentially breaking up Kenny's family made me pause. Instead, I decided to listen to Kenny's stories and keep an eye on him daily, so I could step in immediately if something serious happened.
Helen, what will you teach me today?
Let's see, how about math today? Recently, every time we met, I would teach Kenny something, sometimes schoolwork, sometimes numbers. The park bench had become our regular spot for these little study sessions. Kenny was so eager to learn, and his quick grasp of new concepts made teaching him rewarding. Having long wished for a child, but never having that wish fulfilled, Kenny had become a precious presence in my life. I wanted him to feel that there was a trustworthy adult nearby. I hoped that our time together could brighten his days, even just a little. It was with this wish in mind that I went about my days, including today. Things changed on a rainy day, about a year after I first met Kenny. The town's landscape was starting to change with the falling oak leaves, and the weather had turned chilly. Some dogs might prefer to stay indoors on rainy days. However, if Rolly stays indoors on rainy days, he tends to bark excessively, likely due to not getting enough exercise. For me, getting outside was also a welcome change of pace, so I didn't mind the rain. I dressed Rolly in his raincoat, and we headed out as usual. The fallen oak leaves had created a red carpet on the ground. The scene was so beautiful that I found myself admiring it as we walked. Holding the umbrella, I continued along our usual route, when suddenly Rolly bolted. It happened so quickly that I nearly lost my balance. "Rolly, what's gotten into you?" Had something caught his attention? I didn't really want to run in the rain, but once Rolly started, he wouldn't stop, no matter how much I called out to him. Resigned, I decided to follow his lead. As I hurried to keep up with the leash-tugging Rolly, I realized he was heading towards the park we often visited. "So, you just wanted to play at the park?" I thought, amused by how much Rolly loved the park, but as I looked around the park, I noticed a familiar jacket near a bench. It was Kenny. It was then that I realized the reason Rolly had suddenly started running. He must have picked up Kenny's scent. Even in the rain, Rolly's ability to recognize Kenny was impressive, a result of their frequent meetings. I was about to call out to Kenny as usual, but something seemed off, and my heart skipped a beat. Kenny was curled up by the bench, not moving. His usual cheerful smile was gone, replaced by a pale, sickly expression. It was clear that he wasn't feeling well at all. "Kenny, are you okay? Why are you out here on a rainy day without an umbrella?"
Mom, she told me to leave because a guest was coming over.
Kenny's voice was thin and shaky, as if he was on the verge of tears. His clothes were soaked through, and water was dripping from his hair. What kind of parent would send such a young child out into the rain without an umbrella? What could possibly be going through their mind? I felt an overwhelming surge of anger, so strong that it brought tears to my eyes. As I tried to figure out what to do, I placed my hand on Kenny's forehead. Even without a thermometer, it was clear he had a fever. He looked too weak to stand. This could be a dangerous situation. At this point, it was beyond something I could handle alone. Without hesitation, I dialed 911 and called for an ambulance. At the same time, I found Kenny's address and personal information among his belongings and informed his mother that he was being taken to the hospital by ambulance. Kenny's mother, who answered the phone, sounded surprised but quickly responded with a simple "I understand," before hanging up abruptly. Her reaction left me with mixed feelings, but Kenny's well-being was the priority. Even though I wasn't a relative, Kenny held onto my hand tightly, and since I was the only one who knew what had happened, I accompanied him in the ambulance to the hospital. All I could do was grip his hand firmly, hoping with all my heart that he would be okay. When we arrived at the hospital, Kenny was immediately taken to a treatment room and put on an IV drip. When I asked the doctor about his condition, he confirmed that Kenny's illness was due to exposure to the cold. It was no wonder. In a season where it's already chilly just walking outside, getting caught in the rain is bound to make anyone feel unwell. Fortunately, the doctor assured me that Kenny's life was not in danger. With rest and proper nutrition, he should recover. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. After some time, Kenny's mother finally arrived at the hospital. Even though their house wasn't far, it had taken her quite a while to get there. What had she been doing? When I explained Kenny's condition, she didn't express any gratitude toward me. Instead, she looked at me with a deeply annoyed expression.
"I'm taking Kenny home. He doesn't need to be admitted to the hospital."
While it was true that Kenny's condition wasn't critical, I couldn't help but feel that she was being too hasty, not even listening to the doctor's full explanation before deciding to take him home. But I knew it wasn't my place as an outsider to intervene. Kenny was taken home by his mother, and though I was worried about him, I returned to my own home. It was much later than usual, and when I arrived, the lights were already on. As I opened the living room door, I was met with the sight of Matt, who had returned from work and was looking at me with a furious expression.
Hey, where have you been? I come home exhausted, and dinner isn't even ready.
The first words out of Matt's mouth were complaints about the lack of a prepared meal. He banged on the table, clearly furious. There was no sign of concern or curiosity about why I was late or what might have happened. Even though he often comes home late without explanation, he expects something different from me. I sighed inwardly but decided to explain what had happened. I told him about the neighborhood boy, Kenny, who was so sick that he looked like he was going to collapse. I explained that I had to call an ambulance and accompany him to the hospital, which was why I was late. Well, if that's what happened, I guess it couldn't be helped. The faint hope that he would say something understanding was quickly shattered.
Don't waste your time on someone else's kid. You've just caused more trouble. Nothing good ever comes from you meddling.
My hands froze as I was about to take off my coat. With those words, Matt dismissed not just what I had done for Kenny, but everything about who I am as a person. The Matt who once supported me during the early years of our marriage was gone. In the past, I might have argued back, but over time, I had lost the energy to fight with someone who seemed incapable of understanding. After hurling his insults, Matt threw in a final, "Don't do anything on your own again," before storming off to another room. Finally, my long day had come to an end. After that, our conversations became even more sparse, and the tension between us only grew. The only comfort I found was in having Rolly at home, but whenever Matt was around, I felt uneasy, as if our house wasn't really my home anymore. It seemed that Matt felt just as uncomfortable because he started coming home even later. About a month after our argument about Kenny, something unexpected happened. I was cooking dinner at home when Matt came back earlier than usual. I didn't go out to greet him, but I noticed 2 sets of footsteps coming down the hallway, so I stopped what I was doing. "That's unusual. Did he bring someone home?" Matt stomped down the hallway and threw open the door forcefully. Then he suddenly snarled at me.
From today, we're living together. If you don't like it, leave.
I was shocked by his sudden outburst, but when I glanced beside him, I saw something I never expected. It was Kenny. Our eyes met, and both of us held our breath. Even then, Matt, without offering any explanation, kept insisting that we were going to live together. He repeated the same demand over and over, not giving me a chance to speak. I couldn't believe Matt had brought Kenny here. After he finished his tirade, I finally replied, "All right." He must have thought that his forcefulness had intimidated me into agreeing to the arrangement. Matt wore a proud expression, as if to say, "Naturally." However, that expression quickly changed when Kenny spoke up.
Finally,
Kenny said with a bright smile, to which I returned a smile of my own. Matt, however, was the only one who looked puzzled, as if he didn't understand what was being said. "Yes, it's finally happening. What we talked about has come true." It was truly unbelievable. Who could have imagined that our wish would come true in such a way? Ever since I discovered a certain truth, I had been hoping for this outcome. This situation all traced back to that rainy day when I helped Kenny. After that day, my marriage, which had already been strained, grew even more unbearable, and I decided to take action. I had hired a private investigator to look into Matt's possible infidelity. For a while, I had suspected that Matt was having an affair. His late returns were becoming more frequent. It's sometimes he wouldn't come home until the next day. When I asked him about it, he would dismissively say, "It's just part of the job. There are social obligations." He used that as an excuse to belittle me, but I found it hard to believe that a man his age would spend entire nights out drinking. The final straw is his smartphone. He underestimated me, thinking I was clueless about technology, so he didn't even bother to delete his history and casually exchanged messages with a woman, completely oblivious to the fact that I might discover it. Since our relationship had grown cold, I had chosen to turn a blind eye to it. But this latest incident pushed me beyond my limits, leading me to finally hire a private investigator to look into the matter. I also took photos of the incriminating messages on his phone to gather evidence on my own. A few days later, I received a report from the private investigator. When I went to their office, I was informed that Matt was indeed having an affair with a younger colleague from work. They told me it had been easy to gather evidence because Matt met with Emily frequently and walked around town with her openly, without any attempt to hide their relationship. Up until that point, everything had been within the range of what I expected, but the next piece of information left me speechless. Matt had a secret child with Emily. And that child was none other than Kenny, the boy I had grown so fond of. I was struck by just how small the world could be. Unbelievably, Matt had been the one who, along with Emily, had thrown Kenny out of the house whenever they didn't want him around. If it had been just a momentary lapse of judgment, a fleeting affair, I might have found it in me to forgive him. But having a secret child, that was something I could never forgive. To make matters worse, Kenny had just turned 7 recently. We had even celebrated his birthday together at the park. The long years it takes for a baby to grow into a 7-year-old. It meant that Matt had been betraying me for far longer than I had ever imagined, likely from the very beginning of their relationship. Matt bringing Kenny home and demanding that we live together was completely unexpected. However, I was already fully prepared to file for divorce and demand alimony, having gathered ample evidence of his infidelity. I had been planning to confront Matt with divorce papers this week and report the situation to Child Protective Services, but now that he had made the first move, it worked in my favor. Given Matt's past behavior, it was clear that he was trying to flatter me by saying things like, "You're the best person to raise him," and then pushing the responsibility of raising Kenny onto me. He probably planned to use this as an excuse to kick us out, divorce me, and then remarry Emily. I felt a deep sense of contempt for Matt, who was so shallow and self-centered. But I wasn't foolish enough to fall into his trap. If he thought things would go his way, he was in for a rude awakening. Matt seemed stunned as he watched Kenny and me happily discussing our new living arrangement.
I wish you were my mom, Helen. I bet every day would be so much fun.
Kenny had once wistfully said to me, "Oh, Kenny, someone like me as your mom." I remember feeling a bit embarrassed at the time and responding. Even though I said that, Kenny was a sincere child, and Rolly had grown very attached to him. Deep down, I had always thought, if only I could be a family with him. Now that I knew the full truth, I made a decision in my heart. I cared more about Kenny than Matt or Emily ever did. I was going to protect Kenny and reclaim my own dignity. You may not have noticed, but I know everything. I know about your affair, and I know that Kenny is your secret child with Emily.
An affair? No, that's ridiculous. No, wait. This kid is a relative. His parents had to move overseas for work, but they couldn't take him with them, so they asked for help. It's only natural to help family. Right.
Matt was clearly shocked that I knew everything. But even now, he thought he could outmaneuver me. He continued to pile lies upon lies without a hint of remorse. What was he thinking, trying to deceive me at this point? Even if Matt and Emily were to apologize, there was no way I could ever forgive them for what they had done to Kenny. I was also done letting Matt have his way. It seems you won't listen to reason, so I'll have to call the police. Ignoring Matt's attempts to stop me, I called the police and explained the situation to the officers who arrived. I recounted everything, from the day I had to call an ambulance for Kenny after he had been thrown out in the rain, to all the other details of what had happened. As I calmly explained everything to the police, Matt became increasingly enraged, realizing that things were no longer going his way. He continued to hurl insults at me, but the police eventually took him away. Later, I learned from the police officer who had spoken to me that they had promptly visited Emily as well for questioning. During the investigation, more and more troubling details about Matt and Emily's treatment of Kenny came to light. They had forced Kenny to stay outside when they were together, giving him no money or food. He was only allowed to take a shower every 2 or 3 days. And they made him wear the same unwashed clothes over and over. The details were horrifying. Though I had thought there was no physical abuse, it turned out they had been hitting and kicking him in places covered by his clothes, where friends and teachers wouldn't notice. I couldn't help but feel a deep regret for not recognizing the signs earlier, and for underestimating the severity of the situation. The thought that my own husband had been complicit in such terrible acts filled me with shame. All I wanted was to embrace Kenny, who had grown up so strong despite the abuse he endured. The case eventually went to trial, and both Matt and Emily were given prison sentences. They were convicted of abandoning their responsibilities as guardians and were sentenced accordingly. It was the only appropriate outcome. While I had hoped that they would reflect on their actions, Matt and Emily instead had the audacity to ask Kenny and me to write letters pleading for reduced sentences. A plea for leniency, also known as a petition for reduced sentencing, is a document in which the victims express to the judge or authorities their wish for the perpetrator's punishment to be lessened. In cases such as traffic accidents, I've heard that the relationship between the parties involved after the incident can lead to situations where a plea for leniency might be used. However, there was no way that Kenny, who grew up unloved and mistreated by his parents, or I, betrayed by my husband, would wish for their punishment to be lessened. Even at this point, they were still trying to escape the consequences of their actions. Perhaps the day when they truly regret what they've done will never come for those two. They really are beyond saving. Naturally, we immediately refused their request. In this town, which is generally considered safe, incidents that require police intervention are rare. What Matt and Emily did became a major local news story, reported on by the news channels day after day. In recent years, child abuse has become a significant social issue, frequently covered in the national news as well. It seems that public interest in child abuse has grown significantly. The scrutiny from neighbors directed at the two of them was harsh, and they continued to be whispered about in hushed tones. Their address was even exposed online, causing a major uproar. Although I do feel a tinge of pity, there is nothing more I can do for them. There was no way they could keep this hidden from their workplaces, and as a result, both of them were quickly fired. Given how their names had become infamous, it's doubtful whether they'll ever find stable employment again. They are also required to pay compensation to us, so even after serving their sentences, a life of poverty is likely unavoidable. As for me, after the court proceedings settled down, I went through the process of legally adopting Kenny through a special adoption system, making us officially mother and son. Kenny had spent some time in a children's home, but I registered as a foster parent right away. After a trial period of fostering, we were finally recognized as a family in the eyes of the law. The process was lengthy and involved, but when I thought about being able to live with Kenny, it didn't feel like a burden at all. Kenny, let's take care of each other from now on.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you with me, Helen.
Despite his young age, Kenny seemed to understand the situation he was in. I was told that he never cried for his birth mother or expressed a desire to return to his old home. Well, how about we start by getting a cake to celebrate? I wanted to sign Kenny up for some lessons, but I wondered what he might be interested in. Then again, maybe there's no need to push him into activities just yet. First, I want to sit down with Kenny and have lots of conversations about everything that's happened so far and what the future holds. I'm determined to shower Kenny with all the love he deserves. With these thoughts in mind, I walked home with Kenny. Surrounded by many adults and adjusting to an unfamiliar environment, Kenny seemed a bit worn out at first. However, as the adoption process was completed and our lives began to settle, he gradually regained his natural brightness. At home, it wasn't just me. Rolly, who had grown very fond of Kenny, was there too.
Look, Rolly, it went that way.
Kenny and Rolly are as close as ever, spending their time playing chase and tossing toys to each other. The two of them laugh together like brothers. Watching their joyful interactions brought me a deep sense of peace and happiness. Recently, it had become our daily routine to take morning and evening walks with Rolly, Kenny, and me. No matter how brave Kenny acted, I knew he could never fully forget what his biological parents had done to him. And being known as a child who had suffered abuse, there was a chance that others might view him through a lens of prejudice. Thinking about Matt's betrayal still brought a sense of gloom over me. But I knew we had to keep looking forward and live for tomorrow. Hand in hand, Kenny and I would slowly heal our wounds and continue to live peacefully together.